In Victorian England, there existed a quiet hour when time itself seemed to slow. Between the bustle of the morning and the formality of dinner, there was a space that belonged to women alone. A small kingdom of porcelain and silver, where the gentle clink of teacups spoke louder than words, and the simple act of pouring tea became an art form. This was not merely refreshment. This was ritual. This was connection. This was the quiet art of afternoon tea. Come in, come in. Mind the sunlight. It catches the dust rather beautifully at this hour, don't you think? I was just arranging this shelf when something caught my eye. This teacup, tucked behind a music box. See how delicate it is. The porcelain so thin you can almost see light through it. And this pattern, forget-me-nots and roses, with just a whisper of gold around the rim. This cup was part of a tea service that belonged to Lady Eleanor Whitmore. She lived in a grand house in Belgravia back in 1892, a time when afternoon tea was not simply a habit, but an institution. Lady Eleanor was 50 years old when she held this cup in her hands, and every Thursday at precisely 4 o'clock, she would fill it with Earl Grey and preside over what she called her little afternoon kingdom. I sometimes wonder what those Thursdays were like for her. The careful preparations, the anticipation, the warmth of friendship shared over sandwiches and scones. Her story isn't one of grand adventures. It's simply the story of an ordinary Thursday afternoon. But I find there's something rather extraordinary in the ordinary, don't you? Let me tell you about one such Thursday in Lady Eleanor's life. The morning light came gently through the bedroom curtains, filtered through layers of cream-coloured lace, casting soft patterns on the counterpane. Lady Eleanor Whitmore opened her eyes to warmth, the warmth of Egyptian cotton sheets, the warmth of the fire that had been tended through the night, the warmth of knowing that today was Thursday. Thursday. Her day. She lay still for a moment, listening to the familiar sounds of the house coming awake around her. Somewhere below, she could hear the distant clatter of the kitchen. Cook would already be planning the day's meals. In the hallway, the grandfather clock struck 8, its chimes muffled by the heavy bedroom door. And outside her window, the sounds of London stirred. The clip-clop of horses' hooves on cobblestones, the calls of street vendors, the general hum of a city beginning its day. But none of that concerned her yet. For now, she was cocooned in the peaceful space between sleep and waking, thinking about her afternoon tea. A soft knock at the door, and Mary, her lady's maid, entered with the morning tray. The scent of fresh tea reached Eleanor before she even sat up. Not the Earl Grey she would serve this afternoon, but a robust Assam to start the day. There was toast as well, lightly buttered, and a small pot of marmalade that caught the morning light like amber. "Good morning, my lady," Mary said, setting the tray on the bedside table. "It's a fine day for your Thursday." Eleanor smiled. Even the servants knew that Thursday was special. "The weather?" "Clear and mild, my lady. Perfect for callers." Perfect indeed. Eleanor sipped her tea and watched the patterns of light shift on the ceiling. In a few hours, this bedroom would be a distant memory, and she would be transformed into the hostess, the center of her own small social universe. But for now, she allowed herself this quiet moment, the calm before the beautiful storm of preparation. After breakfast, after dressing in a simple morning gown of dove grey wool, Eleanor made her way downstairs to the morning room. This was her sanctuary, a bright space at the back of the house where she conducted the business of being a lady. The walls were papered in pale yellow and the furniture was comfortable rather than formal. Here she wrote her letters, planned her menus, and prepared for the social obligations that filled her days. She settled at her writing desk, a beautiful piece of rosewood that had belonged to her mother, and pulled out her planning book. Thursday's menu needed to be finalized, and she had learned long ago that success in hosting lay entirely in the details. The sandwiches first, she wrote in her careful hand, cucumber with cream cheese and dill, egg and cress, smoked salmon with lemon butter, watercress with a hint of horseradish. Each sandwich would be cut into precise fingers, crusts removed, arranged on the lower tier of the serving stand. She pictured them in her mind, the pale green of cucumber against white bread, the golden yellow of egg, the pink of salmon, a palette as carefully considered as any painting. Then the scones. She wrote, plain and currant, served warm with clotted cream and strawberry preserves. The scones were perhaps the most important element. They must be light, they must be fresh, they must be warm. She made a note to speak with cook about timing. The scones should emerge from the oven no earlier than 3:30, so they would still be perfect at 4. Finally, the sweets. Lemon curd tartlets, Victoria sponge, sliced thin, petites fours with rosewater icing. These would grace the top tier, the final indulgence after the savoury and the substantial. She set down her pen and read over the list with satisfaction. This menu had been refined over years of practice, adjusted based on the preferences of her regular guests, perfected through countless Thursdays of observation and adaptation. Mrs. Hartley, she knew, had a particular fondness for the lemon tartlets. Mrs. Blackwood preferred the salmon sandwiches, and young Miss Ashford, who would be attending for only the second time, had seemed especially delighted by the Victoria sponge. A hostess remembers these things. A good hostess makes each guest feel seen. Eleanor rose from her desk and made her way to the kitchen, descending the narrow stairs that separated the family's world from the servants' domain. The kitchen was warm and bustling, filled with the smell of baking bread and the clatter of pots. Cook, Mrs. Pemberton, was a stout woman with flour-dusted hands and an air of perpetual industry. "Good morning, Mrs. Pemberton," Eleanor said. "I wanted to discuss this afternoon's tea." Cook wiped her hands on her apron and gave Eleanor her full attention. This was their Thursday ritual, the consultation, the planning, the shared understanding of what must be achieved. "The scones," Eleanor continued, "should come out of the oven at 3:30, no earlier. I want them warm for serving." "Of course, my lady. I'll time them precise." "And the cucumber sandwiches Make sure the cucumber is sliced paper thin. Last week they were just slightly too thick. Understood, my lady. They went through the menu together, item by item, adjusting and confirming. Eleanor appreciated Mrs. Pemberton's skill and dedication. A lesser cook might resent this level of involvement, but Mrs. Pemberton understood that Lady Eleanor's Thursday teas were a point of pride for the entire household. "One more thing," Eleanor said as she prepared to leave. "The clotted cream. It did arrive from Devon. This morning, my lady, fresh as morning dew." Eleanor nodded with satisfaction and returned upstairs, leaving the kitchen to its productive chaos. The drawing room awaited her attention. This room was the heart of Eleanor's Thursday kingdom. A large, elegant space with high ceilings and tall windows that looked out onto the garden square. The walls were covered in pale green silk, and the furniture was arranged to encourage conversation. Sofas and chairs grouped in intimate clusters, small tables positioned for teacups and plates. Eleanor walked slowly through the room, seeing it not as she saw it every day, but as her guests would see it in a few hours. The fireplace first. A low fire was already burning, not for warmth on this mild autumn day, but for the atmosphere it created. The flickering light, the soft crackle, the sense of comfort it provided. The flowers next. A maid had arranged fresh blooms that morning, pale pink roses and white peonies in a crystal vase. Eleanor adjusted one stem slightly, stepping back to consider the effect. The scent was delicate, present but not overwhelming. Important that strong flowers could interfere with the aroma of the tea. The tea table stood ready in the centre of the room. Eleanor approached it like an artist approaching a canvas. The tablecloth was crisp white damask, pressed to perfection, falling in elegant folds to the floor. Upon it sat the silver tea service, the teapot, the hot water pot, the creamer, the sugar bowl, each piece polished to a mirror shine, and the cups, her beautiful bone china cups, arranged on their saucers with the handles positioned at precisely 4 o'clock. She picked one up, this very cup, the one I now hold in my hands, and examined it against the light. The porcelain was flawless, the gold rim catching the afternoon sun, the forget-me-not pattern as fresh as the day it was painted. Eleanor's mother had given her this tea service as a wedding gift 30 years ago. A lady's tea service, her mother had said, is like her reputation. It must be beautiful. It must be beyond reproach. And it must be handled with the utmost care. She set the cup back in its place with a soft clink of porcelain against porcelain and stepped back to survey the table. The 3-tiered cake stand stood empty for now, awaiting the food that would arrive closer to 4 o'clock. The silver sugar tongs lay beside the sugar bowl, their handles worn smooth by years of use. The tea strainer rested in its small dish, ready to catch the leaves. Everything was perfect. Everything was ready, except for Eleanor herself. She climbed the stairs to her bedroom, where Mary waited to help her change. The morning gown was practical, but for afternoon tea, something more elegant was required. Eleanor chose her tea gown, a confection of pale blue silk with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. Tea gowns were less formal than dinner dress, but more refined than day wear, the perfect costume for presiding over one's own domain. Mary helped her into the gown, fastening the tiny buttons that ran down the back, adjusting the drape of the fabric until it fell just so. Eleanor sat at her dressing table while Mary arranged her hair. Nothing too elaborate, just a soft style that framed her face, with a few silver strands left visible. At 50, Eleanor had earned those silver strands, and she wore them without shame. A touch of rose water on her wrists, her mother's cameo at her throat, pearl earrings that had been a gift from her husband on their 20th anniversary. She regarded herself in the mirror and saw not an aging woman, but a hostess, a lady, the mistress of her Thursday afternoon kingdom. The grandfather clock in the hallway struck 3, its chimes echoing through the house. 1 hour remained. Eleanor descended to the drawing room and found it transformed. While she had been dressing, the servants had completed their work. The 3-tiered stand now overflowed with delicacies. The sandwiches arranged in neat rows on the bottom, the scones nestled in a linen napkin on the middle tier, the sweets displayed like jewels on the top. She approached the stand and examined each item with a practiced eye. The sandwiches were perfect, uniform in size, crusts precisely removed, arranged by type. She selected a cucumber sandwich and took a small bite. The bread was fresh, the filling delicate, the cucumber sliced thin enough to be almost translucent. Exactly right. The scones would not arrive until 3:30, but she trusted Mrs. Pemberton on that count. Instead, she turned her attention to the final details. Napkins. She unfolded one and refolded it into a more elegant shape. Teaspoons. She adjusted their position on each saucer. The cream and jam for the scones. She checked that both were present, the cream in its small silver pot, the jam in a crystal dish. Everything was ready, and so she sat. The drawing room was quiet now, holding its breath. Eleanor settled into her favourite chair, not the most prominent seat, but the one with the best view of both the door and the tea table. She could see the garden through the window, where late autumn roses still bloomed in sheltered corners. A sparrow landed on the windowsill, considered the room with its bright eye, and flew away. Eleanor's hands lay folded in her lap, still and composed, but inside she felt the familiar flutter of anticipation that preceded every Thursday tea. It was not nervousness exactly. She had hosted hundreds of these gatherings over the years. It was something more like stage fright, the awareness that a performance was about to begin. For that was what afternoon tea truly was, wasn't it? A performance of grace, of hospitality, of the social arts that women of her class had perfected over generations. Every gesture mattered. Every word carried weight. The way she poured the tea, the way she offered a sandwich, the way she guided the conversation. All of it was choreographed, rehearsed, refined through years of practice. But there was also something genuine in it, something that went beyond performance. Eleanor thought of her mother, who had taught her to pour tea when she was just a girl. The secret, her mother had said, is to make each guest feel that they are the most important person in the room, even when there are 5 of them. She thought of her own early Thursdays, when she was a young bride learning to navigate the social waters of London society. How nervous she had been then, how certain that she would make some terrible mistake. But she had learned, she had adapted, she had found her own style, her own way of creating warmth and welcome within the rigid framework of etiquette. The clock struck 3:30. In the distance, Eleanor heard the kitchen door open and close. The scones were on their way. A moment later, a maid appeared with a basket lined in white linen, steam rising from the fresh-baked scones within. She arranged them on the middle tier of the stand, handling them gently so as not to crush their delicate texture. "Thank you, Sarah," Eleanor said. "They look beautiful." The maid curtsied and withdrew, and Eleanor was alone again. 25 minutes until 4 o'clock. 25 minutes until her guests would arrive, until the drawing room would fill with voices and laughter and the gentle clink of porcelain. She closed her eyes and listened to the silence, savouring these last moments of solitude before her kingdom came to life. The doorbell rang at precisely 4 o'clock. Eleanor remained seated. It would not do for the hostess to leap up at the first sound. She listened to the familiar ballet of arrival, the front door opening, the murmur of voices in the entrance hall, the footsteps approaching the drawing room. Then the parlour maid appeared at the door. "Mrs. Hartley and Mrs. Blackwood, my lady." They entered together, as they often did. Old friends who had known each other since girlhood, and Eleanor since her wedding day. Mrs. Catherine Hartley was tall and elegant, with silver hair swept up in the latest style. Mrs. Anne Blackwood was shorter, rounder, with kind eyes and a ready smile. Both wore afternoon dresses of muted elegance, perfectly suited to the occasion. "Eleanor, my dear." Catherine leaned in for the lightest kiss on Eleanor's cheek. "The room looks absolutely beautiful. Are those peonies?" "From the hothouse," Eleanor confirmed. "Mr. Whitmore's gardener has been experimenting with late blooms." "How wonderful! Anne, do come and look at these flowers." The ladies settled into their seats with the ease of long practice. Catherine took the chair nearest the fire, Anne the small sofa by the window. The arrangement was familiar, comfortable. They had sat in these same positions on countless Thursdays before. "We passed young Miss Ashford's carriage on the way," Anne said. "She should be here momentarily." "Excellent," Eleanor replied. "I do hope she feels more at ease today than at her first visit." The doorbell rang again, and soon Miss Dorothea Ashford was announced. She was a young woman of perhaps 22, with dark hair and an expression of eager uncertainty. This was only her second Thursday at Lady Eleanor's, and she still wore the slightly overwhelmed look of someone navigating unfamiliar social waters. "Miss Ashford, how lovely to see you again." Eleanor extended her hand in welcome. "Do come and sit beside Mrs. Blackwood. She doesn't bite, I promise." The young woman smiled, visibly relaxing at Eleanor's warmth, and took her seat. "Are we waiting for anyone else?" Catherine asked. "Lady Pemberton sent her regrets this morning," Eleanor said. "A touch of cold, I'm afraid. It will be just we four today." "How intimate," Anne said with satisfaction. "I do prefer smaller gatherings." Eleanor rose from her chair and approached the tea table. This was the moment she loved, the moment when the ritual truly began. She lifted the teapot, its weight familiar in her hands, and held it poised over the first cup. "Miss Ashford, how do you take your tea?" The young woman looked momentarily startled, as though she hadn't expected to be served first. "Oh, milk, please, and 1 sugar." Eleanor poured with practiced grace, the amber stream of tea falling in a perfect arc. She added milk from the silver creamer, just enough to turn the tea a warm shade of brown, and used the silver tongs to place a single sugar cube in the cup. Then she stirred, the teaspoon moving gently from 6 o'clock to 12 o'clock, never clinking against the porcelain, before resting it on the saucer. She handed the cup to Miss Ashford, who accepted it with both hands and a murmured "Thank you." "Catherine, the usual?" "Please, you know I can't bear sugar in my tea." Eleanor prepared Catherine's cup, strong, with just a splash of milk, no sugar. Then Anne's, weaker, with milk and 2 sugars. She knew these preferences by heart, had memorized them years ago and never forgotten. A good hostess remembers. Finally, she prepared her own cup. Earl Grey, the bergamot fragrant and familiar, with a thin slice of lemon instead of milk. She settled back into her chair, cup in hand, and the tea party had truly begun. "Now then," Catherine said, reaching for a salmon sandwich, "you must tell us about your visit to the British Museum, Anne. You mentioned something about the Egyptian collection, and so the conversation flowed, as natural and warming as the tea itself." Anne described the mummies and artifacts she had seen, her eyes bright with enthusiasm. Catherine interjected with observations from her own visit years ago. Miss Ashford listened with rapt attention, occasionally asking a question that revealed her intelligence and curiosity. Eleanor guided the conversation with subtle skill, drawing out the quieter voices, redirecting when topics grew too controversial, ensuring that everyone had a chance to speak and be heard. This was the true art of hosting, not the tea service or the sandwiches or the elegant room, but the ability to create a space where women could connect. "Miss Ashford," Eleanor said during a natural pause, "do try the scones. They're best when warm, with plenty of cream." The young woman reached for a scone with evident delight. "Should I put the cream on first, or the jam?" "Ah," Catherine smiled knowingly, "the eternal debate. In Devon they say cream first, in Cornwall, jam first. I believe the only correct answer is whichever way you prefer." "I always do cream first," Anne said. "It acts as a sort of foundation for the jam." "And I do jam first," Catherine countered, "because the sweetness should be the last thing on the tongue." Miss Ashford looked between them, clearly uncertain, and Eleanor laughed softly. "You see, my dear, even among the most refined ladies, there is room for disagreement. Put them on however you like, and know that you are in good company either way." The young woman smiled, a real smile, not the nervous grimace she had worn when she arrived. She split her scone, applied cream, then jam, and took a bite that left a small smear of cream at the corner of her mouth. The afternoon passed in this way, tea and conversation, sandwiches and laughter. They discussed books and gardens, family news and social gossip. They debated the merits of various London shops and exchanged recommendations for dressmakers. Catherine shared a humorous anecdote about her husband's attempts at watercolour painting, which had them all laughing until tears threatened their carefully applied powder. Through it all, Eleanor watched and listened and participated, but part of her remained separate, observing. She watched how Catherine's eyes softened when she spoke of her grandchildren. She noticed how Anne's hands, slightly swollen with age, still moved with grace when she lifted her teacup. She saw Miss Ashford gradually unfold, her nervousness giving way to genuine enjoyment as she realised she was among friends. This was what her mother had meant all those years ago. This was the secret of afternoon tea. It was not about the china, though the china was beautiful. It was not about the sandwiches, though the sandwiches were perfect. It was about creating a space where women could be themselves, could set aside for one golden hour the duties and expectations that governed their lives, and simply sit together in warmth and companionship. The drawing room seemed to glow now, the late afternoon light slanting through the windows, catching the steam rising from the teacups, illuminating the faces of her guests. Eleanor refilled cups as they emptied, offered second helpings of scones, guided the conversation when it flagged, and all the while she felt a deep and quiet satisfaction settling over her. This was her art. This was her gift. And though the world might dismiss it as merely tea, she knew the truth. In a society where women had so little power, so few spaces of their own, the drawing room on Thursday afternoon was a kingdom, her kingdom. The clock struck 5, its chimes a gentle reminder that all good things must end. Catherine was the first to stir. Goodness, is it that time already? I promised Lord Hartley I would be home before 6. Must you go? Anne asked, but she was already reaching for her gloves. Miss Ashford looked reluctant to leave, her eyes lingering on the empty plate where the lemon tartlets had been. Lady Eleanor, thank you so much for having me. This has been truly lovely. You are welcome any Thursday, my dear, Eleanor replied. I hope you will make a habit of it. I should like that very much. They gathered their things, these women who had come as guests and would leave as friends. Eleanor walked them to the door, accepting kisses on the cheek, murmuring farewells. Catherine pressed her hand with particular warmth. Eleanor, darling, your Thursdays are the highlight of my week. You have a gift for making people feel welcome. Then they were gone, their carriages clattering away down the cobblestone street, and Eleanor was alone. She stood in the entrance hall for a long moment, listening to the silence settle back over the house. The servants would come soon to clear the drawing room, to wash the cups and put away the silver. But for now, she had this moment of stillness. She walked slowly back to the drawing room and stood in the dawn, surveying the aftermath of her afternoon kingdom. The tea table was scattered with crumbs and used napkins. The chairs were slightly askew, moved by her guests during their conversations. Empty cups sat on various surfaces, bearing the traces of lipstick and tea stains, but the room still held the warmth of what had happened here. The echoes of laughter seemed to linger in the corners. The scent of tea and roses hung in the air. Eleanor crossed to the tea table and picked up one of the cups. This cup, the one with the forget-me-nots. A small amount of tea remained in the bottom, cold now. She held the cup in her hands and thought about the hundreds of times it had been filled, the dozens of hands that had held it, the countless conversations that had swirled around it. Her mother had poured from this cup, and now Eleanor poured from it, and someday, perhaps, her granddaughter would learn to pour from it as well. The tradition would continue. The art would be passed down. She set the cup back on its saucer with a soft clink and turned away from the table. The servants would take care of the rest. Her Thursday was complete. And so Lady Eleanor's teacup found its way here to my little shop after all these years. I bought this cup at an estate sale in Belgravia along with the rest of the service. The woman who sold it to me said it had been in her family for generations, but none of the younger members wanted it. They drink coffee now, she said with a sigh. No one has time for proper tea. I like to think Lady Eleanor would be disappointed by that, but perhaps not surprised. The world moves on after all. The rituals that once seemed eternal fade and are forgotten. And yet, the cup remains. This delicate piece of porcelain, with its forget-me-nots and its gold rim, still as beautiful as the day it was made. I wonder sometimes if objects can hold memories, if this cup somehow remembers all those Thursday afternoons, all those conversations, all that warmth and connection. Perhaps that's fanciful of me, but I choose to believe it anyway. Afternoon tea was never really about the tea, you see. It was about the pause, the breath, the moment when women could set aside their many roles, wife, mother, daughter, hostess, and simply be themselves, together. It was about friendship and connection and the small rebellions of pleasure in a world that demanded so much of them. Lady Eleanor understood this. She created a space where such moments could happen, and though her Thursday kingdom has long since faded, the echo of it remains. In this cup, in this story, in the simple act of sharing tea with a friend. The next time you sit down with a cup of tea, perhaps you might think of her. Think of the careful preparations, the beautiful table, the guests arriving at 4 o'clock. Think of the gentle clink of porcelain, the soft murmur of conversation, the golden afternoon light. Think of a woman who turned something as simple as tea into an art form, and know that in doing so, she created something that mattered, something that lasted, something quiet and beautiful and entirely her own. Now then, it's getting late and you must be tired. This old shop will be here whenever you need it, whenever you want to slip away from the world for a while and listen to the stories that old things have to tell. Rest well, dear visitor. Rest well. The teacup goes back on its shelf now, where it can catch the afternoon light and remember all those golden Thursdays, so very long ago.